Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, a podcast about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Today, we're going to be talking about two recently released Marvel things. On the film side, The Marvels, and on the TV side, the conclusion of Loki Season 2. I am your host, Derek McDuff, and joining me today, I've got a very special guest, Alex Marcus, Director of Podcasting at Pop Break and the host of Bill versus the MCU podcast. How is it going? It's good to have you on.
It's going great. And just for your audience, I am not Bill. Bill is my co-host on the podcast, though, and he is also the editor-in-chief of the popbreak.com. So that's why it's called that. It's might be a little confusing if you're like the host of Bill versus the MCU, Alex.
Yeah, every time you guys start, I think you go, "Hi, I'm not Bill," which is always gets it every time it gets me. But yeah, you obviously, I've been on your show, Bill vs. the MCU, talking about MCU stuff, and we've been trying to have you on for a while, but with all the shifting dates and everything in the MCU because of delays and because of the writer's strike and the actor's strike and everything else that has just been going on, it was tough to get things lined up, and even what we were going to talk about wasn't quite sure. So I'm glad it finally worked out, and we got you on here to talk about this movie and this show.
We made it. I'm so happy to be here finally, and it was so exciting to just keep what the topic was going to be. Kept shifting every few months, but I mean, I think we settled on something that I'm very excited to be here to talk about. So.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. Before we get into it, what's your background? What's your relationship with the MCU?
Yeah, so I guess my background, it's funny. So on my podcast, Bill versus the MCU, one of the things that I like to do is interview people like you about your background on like comic book stuff. And what I've learned is that my origin story is not that unique. Because I, like many people, kind of fell in love with these characters by, watching the cartoons in the 90s, the X-Men, the animated series, and Spider-Man, the animated series, right? Those were my first exposure as a kid to superhero stuff, along with Power Rangers, of course, which was my most favorite of all of them back when I was 7. But then, as I grew up, we started to get the movies, the X-Men movies, the Spider-Man movies, and I thought they were really cool, and I was big fans of those. And then the Marvel movies comes out right when I'm kind of graduating from high school. And at first I kind of had a wait and see approach because these were characters that I didn't know. I had no familiarity with. I watched the first Iron Man movie, but didn't watch the second one in theaters. And then I kind of let the Captain America and Thor stuff go. But then out of the Avengers, I was like, if they're really going to pull everything together like this, I want to see what that's like. I can't imagine what it would be like to have, Robert Downey Jr. with a Norse god and a guy from the 40s. That sounds insane. Yeah. So I'm just going to go. I'm going to watch all of them and catch up. And I just immediately fell in love from there. And I've been a diehard fan ever since.
Very, very nice. Yeah. But yeah, it's been, Marvel obviously has been, king of the world for so long. But before we dive into, as you kind of talked about how it just, you never looking back, but, this year has been not rough for them. It hasn't been like what, the year that DC has had, for example, with the Flash and Shazam 2 and the reports coming out about Aquaman. But it's been, not their best year, and I know you talked about this on your show, so sorry if this is a little redundant, but, with the Marvels still having a strong opening, but not as strong as some people had hoped or anticipated. And then that piece, there's Joanna Robinson's new book. There's that Variety piece that came out. What are your feelings on kind of the state of Marvel and all this stuff?
Yeah, so my feelings on the state of Marvel are complicated, as you might imagine, because I feel like... So I have this unique opportunity to have literally just watched last year. Me and my co-host Bill, we started in January and we watched all the first 4 phases of the MCU in full, 1 month at a time for 12 episodes. So everything that happened in the MCU up until until this year is very fresh in my mind. So I sometimes get frustrated by the discourse around like, oh man, it was so great back then and everything was figured out and there was such a great plan and it was all working and now it's such a disaster, because I feel like when people are saying that, they are talking about it from this perspective of it's just pure nostalgia, right? Like they're inflating what was good about the MCU previously, and they're also kind of using that to like make it so that way the new films and TV shows are not ever able to hit that like impossible standard, right? Because what people seem to completely forget is the fact that this is definitely a low point for the MCU. Absolutely. Maybe one of its lowest. But it's not the first time that we've been here. It's not the first time that Variety has blared out MCU in crisis, right? We had these cycles every year or two, basically from the time that Iron Man 2 came out, when that made a ton of money, but then the big criticism was, oh man, they're jamming all of this Avengers stuff in there and they can't manage the universe that they're trying to build and this is all going to fall apart, right? And then the Thor movie comes out and it gets, like it's mediocre reception. It makes some money, but a lot of people are like, I don't know, Frost Giants, this is weird, Loki's not working for me. Like then Captain America comes out and I feel like so many people, that movie, myself included, just like it missed them. Like it came out at the end, towards the end of the summer, and people just were like, "Oh yeah, it seems like it's going to be kind of hokey," and they didn't even give it a chance. Then Avengers comes out, it's this huge success, and everybody loves it, right? And it rewrites the rules of Hollywood. Everybody wants a collected universe. And then the following year, Iron Man 3 comes out, makes all the money in the world, but gets like mediocre reviews. Some people really like it, some people don't. It's very divisive. Then Thor: The Dark World comes out, had a terrible production, lots of kind of, issues with like the director walking away, alienating Natalie Portman, who's this Oscar-winning star. And suddenly it's like, oh, MCU is in crisis. MCU is in trouble. Did they reach this like impossible standard now with the Avengers that they can't possibly replicate? And then the very next year you have Guardians of the Galaxy and Winter Soldier, which are two huge hits. They make a ton of money. They're huge fan favorites. They're huge critic favorites. And everybody's like, oh, Marvel can do no wrong. And then the very next year, it's Ant-Man comes out, and it's all the Edgar Wright controversy. And Age of Ultron comes out and makes a lot of money, but slightly less than the Avengers. And Joss Whedon spends the entire press tour bitching about how terrible it is to work for Marvel. And it's oh no, Marvel is in crisis. So like we've been here over and over again with these stories, and a lot of them are valid because if you had the chance to read Joanna Robinson, Dave Gonzalez's book, like I devoured it in like a couple of days. What you see is that there's this kind of interesting alchemy in Marvel Studios between a carefully thought out long-term vision that Kevin Feige has and this impulse to kind of improvise and throw it together on the set the day of and be willing to change things and have the best idea possible win out, even if it's on the within like a day before the movie comes out. They're still going to shoot that extra scene because it's a great idea and they can't do it without it. So there's been this sort of like unsteady foundation throughout the whole thing, and it's just worked well. But it also worked well in a sense that it was being scaled up over time, right? Our expectations kept going higher as more of it was getting built. And then you get to this amazing crescendo of Infinity War and Endgame, and like the last 2 years of Phase 3 was really popping, where all of those movies worked. There were no misses. It was all hits. And then we're like, okay, we're going to do the brave thing and we're going to blow it up and start over again and try to do something new and take more chances now that we're on the top of the world. And that was going to require some patience and some time. And then they got the kind of edict from Disney executives saying, well, we're starting this streaming service and we need to have a Marvel movie and a Marvel TV show every quarter, every year for the rest of time. And they had to hire a bunch of new people who were not familiar with the way Marvel made movies and this kind of weird alchemy that they would try to capture. And it kind of skeetered and kind of fell apart a little bit there. And we're kind of now in the wreckage of that. But so when I see that, I see like a kind of consistent ebb and flow over time of, stories behind the scenes of things going great and then things not going great and things going great and not going great, and projects coming out that are good, projects coming out that are not so good and that are creatively compromised, and some that are like incredibly bold and original. And so I feel like we're kind of just in the mix of what we've always been in the mix of, but the difference now is there's this media narrative of Marvel is in crisis, they're in trouble, they can't rebuilds, they can't put it together, they're never going to be able to do the thing that they did before, and it just causes every single release to be this like flashpoint of is it dead yet, is it dead yet, is it dead yet? and and I think in that atmosphere, it's really hard to get a fair shake. So that's kind of a very long answer to your question, but that's basically how I'm feeling about the MCU right now.
No, honestly, that is really well put. I'm in complete agreement with you. It's something that I've been saying similar things, since like phase 4 when people started saying all of this stuff about, oh my god, the sky is falling. And you brought up Iron Man 2. I think Iron Man 2 is worse than like any of the stuff we're getting right now, to be honest. I really do not care for that movie. And I think that, but it's just a narrative of like, oh no, Marvel's in trouble. So anytime something happens like, oh no, this film only made $100 million in its opening weekend, it's like the sky is falling. It's ridiculous, and it's something I like to tease my co-host on another podcast I do, Damien, about. Is he's kind of sometimes a little bit more whiplashy when it comes to what he thinks about a Marvel movie. And I'm like, you just like every other one, and that I feel like is the kind of general consensus. It's like, well, we didn't like Secret Invasion, but before that, Guardians, it was like Marvel's dead, Secret Invasion's terrible. Well, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Marvel's back, but then before that, Quantumania was terrible. But before that, it was the Guardians Holiday Special, it's back. And then before that was Love and Thunder. Oh, it was bad. And then before that, it was Miss Marvel. It's great. And then it was She-Hulk. It was bad. Oh, before that, Wakanda Forever. It's great. It's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's like, some of these are just going to hit a little bit harder than others, and it's that it's like that same weird binary that on Rotten Tomatoes, it's like it's either it's good or it's bad. I saw this video somebody did on TikTok where there was a person who's like, here's unrefutable proof that Marvel's doing terribly because the Marvels has like a 58%. And then somebody made a response to that. They're like, well, now they're at 62%. So they're fresh. They were rotten before, but now they're fresh. So that is that irrefutable proof that it's a good movie. And it's ridiculous. Just the way that, silly. Yeah, these cycles go. And like you said, this is nothing new. Marvel they're trying to figure stuff out, and things happen like the Jonathan Majors situation. And how do we handle this? But that's always happened. Like when Thanos got introduced, that was just something that Joss Whedon creep decided to throw in, but it became one of their biggest things ever. And so it's like, what's going to happen? How is anything going to play in anything? They have a general plan, but the specifics are going to come together. Some things will hit, some things won't, and they'll figure it out along the way. So I think you're absolutely right with all of that. So I really enjoyed listening to you because it was just like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been thinking. I'm not the only one. So thank you.
Yeah, well, because here's the thing. Like, if we look back at the previous Marvel, like, track record, right? Mm-hmm. We got 2 to 3 movies a year, every year for, like, a solid decade, right? And in those movies, you typically had one great movie, one pretty good movie, and one just okay movie. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you look at the trajectory of the release output of the last 3 years, you've gotten about a third of the movies have been great, a third of the movies have been good, and a third of the movies have been just okay, right? And the TV shows... Yeah. It may be a little bit less quality. Like in the 2021, I think that all of the releases were great. I thought that WandaVision was fantastic. I thought Loki was fantastic. I thought that Hawkeye was fantastic. Some people felt very frustrated by the end of WandaVision, and that kind of soured them on the thing. Some people didn't go for Hawkeye the way that I did, and a lot of people I know did. So then that track record is more spotty for them. But I think that if you look at 2022, the TV shows mostly had a harder time working in 2022, right? Where it's like, I thought that Miss Marvel had an excellent start, and the first few episodes were incredible, and I thought that the ending was really strong, but the middle, where the plot got kind of like eaten by edits, and you're just like, what's happening? What are we doing? So like that was an issue, right? And Moon Knight is like, it seems like it was like 3 different shows, and then now we found out like, well, there was like literally like a war between creatives on set, so that's why it felt that way. You're like, okay, well that makes sense. So there was some quality control on the TV side of things, but if you look at it as a whole, it's like, okay, well, 3 good shows, 3 okay shows, So it feels like they're hitting their standards of success, but our perception of it is different now, because I think critics are holding Marvel to a higher standard because they're on the top of the world. So we're not going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, I think if a movie like Thor, like the original Thor came out now, I think it would get a much lower Rotten Tomatoes score. Mm-hmm. If a movie like The Incredible Hulk came out now, exactly the same movie, it would get a lower Rotten Tomatoes score, right? And I think the other thing is that all of us fans are 15 years older than when this started. And
Yeah.
for some people, that means I don't really care as much about this stuff anymore. And then are we getting the new people in as much? Are we getting the younger fans through the door? Like, are we getting the people who, like, I have a nephew who's 11, and he grew up always knowing what Marvel was. And I used to bring him when he was like 5 and 6 and 7 to the movies, and we would watch it together. And now he's like over it. He likes football now. And like, that's okay, right? That's what happens with kids. But so that's I think a problem for Marvel long term. Like they're going to have to do something about that. But I think they're working on it, and we just have to see. I think that if you look at it, we had a great movie in Spider-Man: No Way Home. Everyone kind of universal 100% approval rating on that in 2021. You had in 2022, you had Wakanda Forever, which universal approval rating, right? And then in 2023, you have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, universal approval rating. So, and yet, if you listen to the media and the press and people online, it's like, well, their movies are dead. It's over. They can't come back. It's like, I don't understand that. It feels like there's no perspective on those things.
Yeah, completely. And you bring up a good point about there just being a lot more Marvel now because of the edict and all the Disney Plus shows and everything. And one of the things that came out recently too was like, oh, well, Marvel's solved their TV problem because they're going to use showrunners and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, well, what is that? It's not like that's the reason people didn't like She-Hulk is because, there wasn't a showrunner, like it's
Yeah.
because
Well, and
there's
also, I mean, your show is called Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, and I'm pretty sure the Dragon Bones related show had a showrunner and was not the most well received thing Marvel ever did. So
Yeah, or look at what had a showrunner? Hellstrom. Does anyone remember that show? No. Did
did
anyone
it
like that show?
did it have a showrunner? I'm not sure if we could definitively prove that.
But but that's the point. It's just like people are like, oh well, they were doing all these things wrong and like blah 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 blah, and it's like no, that's just part of the narrative. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
think ultimately it's going to be a good thing that they're slowing things down and they're going to be releasing fewer pieces of content because
Yeah.
it just means that the core team that are there that always knew how to do this are going to be able to focus more on the day to day, and that when a big crisis breaks out, like for instance on Secret Invasion, that people, it's not the third string team trying to solve it for a couple months, and then higher up it comes in and it like helicopters in is like, okay, we need to solve this fast. It's like, which is based on reporting what happened with that show, and you can tell the difference, right? So if the actual core brain trust is managing it from the beginning, I think that when something starts to go off the rails, it's going to be easier to fix this time around, and that happens when there's fewer projects. So, and also, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's nice to. Part of the fun of Marvel movies was like we're watching the one that's coming out now, and we're getting a tease for the next one, and oh man, I can't wait for the next one to come out. And when you literally don't have to wait for the next one to come out because it's coming out in 2 weeks perpetually, I think that does kind of rob some of the excitement out of it. And so I think that it's a good thing that they're moving away from that as well. But I don't think that the projects that did come out are nearly as bad for the most part, aside from Secret Invasion, as their reputation is allowed to have this time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm really glad that things are slowing down for a lot of the same reasons. Like you said, too much of a good thing. I think about all the time, like how when I started this podcast in I was like 2018 or something, and I was like, I would do like 1 or 2 episodes a year or 3 episodes a year at most, even covering like Daredevil and stuff like that. And now it's like I have to feel like I have to do an episode every month because there's just the content just it's just keeps churning and churning and churning. And it's nice to be like, okay, it's special now. If there's always something Marvel, it's not special, but now it's like, oh, cool, there's a new Marvel movie. And I'm kind of excited for 2024, just having a little bit of a break and being like, cool, we can go back and see something that we haven't seen in a while. And then also, I think it's a big benefit because of the VFX crunch. That's something that's been commented on a lot, is just the way that people think that a lot of these shows don't look great. And it's, because there's only a certain amount of people working in that industry. And if I would recommend anybody, if you want to know more about it, watch the documentary Life After Pi. Really great documentary about just how VFX artists are constantly screwed over. They really go in depth into it. Talks about, the VFX artists who worked on Life of Pi and how their company went into bankruptcy, and then like 7 days later they won an Academy Award for their visual effects. And hopefully we're going to be seeing the unionizing of the Marvel VFX artists, which would be amazing. I really hope that happens for a lot of reasons. For both the term for like the people working on it, their quality of life, and also for the quality of the work that we'll get. I think will be improved a lot if you are able to give these people the time and money that they deserve to work on this thing.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on that. I've been a big proponent of unionization for VFX workers, not just at Marvel or Disney, but across the board. Because what they go through is insane. And I think you hear about like, oh, we had to work so hard, and you're like, okay, well, but isn't that like the whole deal with movies and whatever? Like, you always have to work hard. But like, when it was explained to me that the process that they go through is basically they bid on a job, right? The studio bids, the effects house bids on a job, and that job is usually for a sequence that has a lot of VFX, or maybe even a tiny portion of the sequence. And they say, okay, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it for this much. And then there's a bidding war, and they keep bidding down until the person says, okay, I could do it for the least amount. And then they're like, okay, you're hired, you do that. And that's like, okay, that's how things work, right? But then the way those contracts are written is that then the creatives from the studio side of things, from like the director and writers, whatever, can then call up the VFX house and say, hey, that thing you just spent 6 months working on, we're going to throw it out because we had a better idea. So now we want that sequence to feature this instead. And then they work on that for 2 months. And then they say, actually, we want it to be like that, but on this way. And we're going to change it a little bit here. We're going to change it a little bit there. And up until the point when like the movie comes out. And meanwhile, the VFX team are still only getting paid what they originally assessed that first bid. And they're locked into that. They can't add any extras. They can't add overages. They can't do anything like that. And that's insane. Nobody works that way. No one would agree to work that way if they weren't being forced to. So I think when it's explained like that to people, I think people will have a lot more, empathy for what the industry is going through right now. Because how could you possibly say, like, I'm going to do this job, right? And you're like, okay, cool. And I'm going to do it for this price. Great. And now the job is 100, 200 times more difficult, requiring thousands of more hours, but the pay is the exact same original thing that you budgeted out from the first place. Like, that's an insane system that's unsustainable. So I really hope that we get movement in the coming years to address that, because that's just not right.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the stuff, you talked about hopefully they can unionize with the stuff that we've seen with the actors union and the writers union, the gains they've been able to get with their strikes. Hopefully that will pass over into other aspects of the entertainment industry. Remains to be seen, but I think that those are
if
positive
it means
signs.
if it means that I have to wait until 2052 to see Secret Wars, so be it.
Right, at this rate, the way it keeps getting delayed, we might. But you know what? Like you said, it's worth it. It's very much worth it. But yeah, to kind of get to the topic of today's show, which is of course Captain Marvel, which is tied into everything we've been talking about. But the movie itself, well, I'll just get right into it. What did you think of it?
The Marvels, I loved it. I had so much fun watching this movie. I've seen it twice now because it's a movie that is just extremely propulsively paced. And I knew that we were going to be coming out and talking about this, and I wanted to make sure that I had all of the details of the plot correct if I'm going to be talking about it on a podcast. But rewatching it a second time was just as enjoyable as watching it the first time. I think that the leads have a tremendous amount of chemistry together. I think that some of the set pieces are really well done. I think it's a movie that clearly has been edited down, and I think that it could have been a richer and more intellectually stimulating and emotionally stimulating movie if it hadn't removed some of those pieces. Now, I say that without having seen some of those pieces, so maybe some of those pieces wouldn't have worked as well as they do in my head, and I'm sure we can get into that. But I think overall, they focus the story on the three leads, on Iman Vellani, on Tiana Parrish, and on Brie Larson, and they have fantastic chemistry together. Those are characters that are really strong, who I've liked in previous installments. And I think that because I'm invested in them already, I was able to have some of the emotional beats hit harder than someone I could imagine watching this without having those backstories and that background in those characters. But as a movie, as a whole, I thought it was fantastic, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's not like top 10 Marvel for me. It's right on the edge of the top 20 for me, but it's just a really solid, fun time from start to finish. And that's what I needed this week when it came out, so I was happy about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. This was just, like I said, it's not like a top tier amazing Marvel or anything like that, but like the way I was like, this feels like the best superhero movie of 2006. You know what I mean? Like it's just it's and I appreciate like how streamlined it
As
is.
2006 was a tough year for superhero movies. It's not a high compliment.
No, but you know, but but it does, you like the characters, you like their interactions. There's some interesting themes with them. I like the whole thing about Captain Marvel and her feeling like kind of guilty and responsible for this kid, you know, Monica Rambeau, who looked up to her so much when she was young, and she kind of just left her, and she's like realizes she can't make the same mistakes with another kid who is now looking up to her, in Camilla Khan. And I love all their interactions. The way they were like switching powers, it felt gimmicky in a fun way, like an 80s way. What I kept thinking of, like, once again with that like early 2000s, it was like how everyone switched superpowers in the Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. It just felt like, oh, this is just like a fun little gimmick thing to throw in, and it connected them. It all made them closer. Um, you know, the villain, there wasn't a lot with the villain. The villain was just kind of like, whatever, we need a bad guy. They're here to blow stuff up, just to move the plot forward, to give us a reason to do the thing. And Marvel, you know, that's something Marvel got criticized for early on, was not having strong villains. They definitely have some really, you know, they've been notable for, like, I don't know, the past 2 or 3 phases for having very, very strong villains. But I kind of appreciate that it's like the villain is kind of inconsequential in this. It's whereas sometimes a really good villain in a movie where they're almost taking focus away. Like, I think the best part of Thor: Love and Thunder was just whatever Christian Bale was doing. He was in a different movie, but like that whole thing was great. Whereas, but it almost took away from the like the themes in the plot, because it felt a little bit out of place. Whereas this one, it's like, yeah, the villain is there. They're just doing whatever. They're just a way for these characters to all interact. The way that they bond and interact and, you know, talk to each other is just so fun. There was so many good moments and beats. Like when they go to the musical planet, I thought that was really fun and funny and something I'd never seen in a superhero movie before. I thought Camilla Khan, like her character was just such a breath of fresh air. She's just like, it felt like, oh, just a fangirl of this in this world. She's just having a good time. She's hanging out with a hero. She's just geeking out and loving life. And, you know, you said, like, obviously this movie has been cut right down to the bone, but maybe, you know, that might have been a good thing. I kind of like, it's the shortest Marvel movie. It was kind of nice. It was almost like I kind of like Quantum of Solace a little bit. It's kind of the same feel of like, that's the shortest Bond movie, and I kind of like them just like, you cool. And I appreciate like a big 3 hour long epic, you know, that's great. But when it's just a movie that's just like very character driven, the plot is kind of inconsequential, you just get in to kind of see some fun things. It was nice to get in and get out, you know, an hour 45. It was nice to have a short Marvel movie for a change. I kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think that. So I think it's very clear, especially if you watch it a second time, that a lot of what they cut it out of the movie was villain stuff. There's sequences where, like, the villain, who's played by Zawe Ashton, who happens to be married to Tom Hiddleston, who we'll be talking about in just a little while. There's moments where she is delivering dialogue in one place, and then it quick cuts to, like, as if it's the same conversation, but the person she's talking to they're like suddenly in like the back of the room instead of being in the front of the room, and you're like, okay, what is? Clearly, this was a longer conversation.
Right.
And
right.
other times, especially towards the end of the movie, where it's very clear that there were things that were cut out of it. And I think that, my theory on the movie is that maybe it opened with her character in that flashback sequence, and maybe that sequence was 7 minutes long instead of 30 seconds long, and you got to see from her perspective Carol Danvers flying into Hala and causing havoc and making a speech declaring that she was doing this for their own good, but everybody terrified, and then it kicks off the Civil War, right? I feel like there's been a number of Marvel movies over the years that have started with a sort of serious opening like backstory set piece that then kind of opens. We get the Marvel logo, and then it's like a zany wacky thing, like this
like
Guardians of the Galaxy comes to mind, Love and Thunder comes to mind, right? So I feel like maybe that was what they did. I don't have any reporting to say that, but it feels that way, especially because like when you see what we have left over in the Hollis flashback, all of it is just CGI Carol Danvers. Like, there's literally no moment where she's not a CGI character. So clearly, whatever, if they ever did shoot anything, they definitely like copied and pasted and moved it around so that way it could be done very expediently. And I think that's probably a loss. I think that there's something in this story with the Darben is the character's name, where she feels like she's the hero of her own story. Clearly, she has gathered her people after decades of civil war under this message of going out and getting revenge for what the Annihilator, Carol Danvers, did. And there's an ecological kind of colonialism aspect to that, which definitely feels like it's mirroring some stuff that we learned about the Kree that the Captain Marvel movie was interested in, some subtext around like going out to, different underdeveloped areas or different non-colonial nations and excising resources, right? You could see there being a meaty story there that is... And the movie's just like, no, we want it to be good, fun times. So we're just going to zip all of that out, like just vacuum it out as much as we possibly can. And she's just like a mean lady with purple energy. And and that's it. And I think that's a loss. But who knows what it did to the pace of the movie. I think that if you're going to make it leaner, right? If you're going to be like, I don't want this movie to be controversial. I don't want this movie to have divisive political messaging. I want it to just be a fun time. I think the instinct to remove that stuff and repivot around Damon Vellani's Kamala Khan character, which is clearly what they did, was the right impulse. If that's what you're going to do, if you want to say we need to make this less serious, we need it to just have it be about the Kamala Khan character interacting with these other superpowered women, like that's going to be fun for the audience. That's the right change to make. So there's a part of me that feels like I really would like to see what Nia DaCosta, the director's vision was for this, because I think it could be a richer experience. But if you have to make the change to just put as much Kamala Khan, as much of her family in the movie as possible, I think is the right impulse. So that's kind of how I feel about the villain and all of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would love to see... Oh, sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, I was just going to say there's even, it even seems like if you look at earlier trailers for the movie, it seems clear that Kamala at some point was kidnapped by Darben and separated, and Monica and Carol are having to work together to get her back. And that is like, and when you watch, and if you know that and you watch the movie again, you're like, oh, it's very clear what they're setting up here, where kind of Kamala wants to be a hero. She wants to be the young hero. But these other heroes are like, heroing isn't a fun game we don't trust you. You're still a kid. And then she ends up maybe doing something reckless and gets kidnapped, and then they feel guilty, and then they have to come together as a team, right? That's a very kind of tried and true story. But what that does is that takes the most interesting person out of the superhero team for a big chunk of the movie and like throws exposition at them probably. And that probably didn't test well with audiences. That probably was like, no, what we want is them to be together and having fun together. And so I get it. I get the change. And I think maybe it's not the worst thing in the world that they did that. I just kind of wish that if they were making the change, they had done it in the scripting phase instead of like having filmed the entire movie and then they're like, uh-oh, let's fix it. So that's, I guess, my one note.
Right. And I would love to see a director's cut and to like compare and contrast, because you never know with these things. Like, it's like, watching like Kingdom of Heaven, the director's cut, you're like, wow, this is a phenomenally better movie. But then, like watch something like Apocalypse Now, watching the director's cut of that, you're like, the pacing is completely fucked now. Like, yeah, it's like why are we at this? Yeah, the French plantation. You're like, oh my god,
French plantation. You're just there forever, and you're like, I get it, colonialism, right? Okay, can we move on, please?
So maybe that was this same kind of situation. Maybe it was like like when she's kidnapped or whatever. It's like, we get it, colonialism. Let's move on to the fun superhero stuff. It might have been that. And maybe, I mean, Marvel's I feel like there's not really like a lot of director's cuts in Marvel. No. They don't have the same toxic fan base that's going to be like, hashtag release the DaCosta cut or something like that. So, which is, I think not a bad thing necessarily. I guess we don't know.
If you read that MCU book that just came out, it's very clear that Kevin Feige is the final cut on every one of these movies, and because he is the ultimate auteur at the top of everything, and so he's not going to allow a director's cut at all. I guarantee you that he even like individually approves like cutscenes to go to Disney Plus, like as bonus features. Like he's not letting anything out if it's not part of his vision, and what's in his vision is in the film most of the time. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, yeah. Well, I guess well, it's one of those things. Yeah, we'll remain a mystery, but yeah, that all checks out. But yeah, before we move on to Loki, I just wanted to ask because this has those two. Though I guess I was thinking one was a post credit scene, but I guess it's actually just attached to the end of the movie. But what did you think
although
of?
it definitely was a post-credit scene, and they just
Right.
moved. There's no way they didn't just like move. I think that that was a mid-credit scene. X-Men
Mhm.
thing was a post-credit scene, and they were like, people aren't gonna. We need it up front. We need
Yeah.
to make as many people see this as possible,
Right.
and so we get it at the end instead. And I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, it's such a fun callback to the original MCU post credit scene, and it's just she's been hanging out with Nick Fury, obviously, so that's probably where people are like, how did she know? It's like she was with Nick Fury, whatever. But like, it's such she's trying to be cool, but she's just the same. She still is such a dork, she's
Yeah,
like when she's talking to Kate Bishop, she's just like. You thought you were the only kid superhero? I'm 23. Like it works so well with her character because it doesn't feel like we're just tacking this on to set up the new Avengers. It's a real
yeah.
great character beat too. I don't know. What'd you think?
Absolutely. I fully agree. I love every minute of it. The people who are like, "How would she know exactly what Nick Fury said?" It's like, have you spent any time with this character? She clearly would have asked Nick Fury, "How did you get Iron Man to join the Avengers?" and would not stop
Mhm.
pestering him until he said so. Like, obviously. And so that doesn't bother me at all. And I just love when she's like, "Where did you?" What like Kate is saying, like she's saying that she has this tablet with all this information on her, and Kate's like, "Where did you get that?" And she's like, "I found it underneath my couch."
Yeah, I
It's
was.
just
It's so
she's
good.
so fantastic. Iman Vellani is such a treasure, and it's notable. I think throughout this whole movie, like if you look at Phase 4 and Phase 5, pretty much every character, like every movie that's come out has like featured a plucky teenage sidekick because they're like, oh, like our core audience is getting old. We need to put a 15-year-old in it just to make sure that everybody gets a Peter Parker now. Like it worked for Iron
Right.
Man, now everybody gets one. Um, and I think it's worked to varying degrees across all of those
Mhm.
different films. But I think it's a real testament to Iman Vellani as an actress that she just completely makes you forget that that was even a thing that they were doing in the other movies. Like, because it's
Mhm.
just so her movie. She doesn't feel like this plucky teenage sidekick. She feels like the star of the film, and that's pretty impressive given who she is acting up against. And I think giving her that final grace note at the end of the movie is perfect. You get the great scene with Carol and her in the the airplane on the ranch
Mhm.
to end like the emotional story, and then you get the final tag with her being the new teenage Nick Fury. Please, like it's just perfect. I love this, and I hope that even though this movie didn't do what people were hoping it would do internally at Marvel, I hope that they don't blame the Kamala Khan character for that, and I hope that they continue to build around her because she is such an asset. She's as exciting of a character as we've gotten in this multiverse saga.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's seems like mentioned like this not performing well. I talked about how it kind of had a softer opening, still over $100 million opening weekend. It's got some big competition coming out now, but I think that's big part of that is a just toxic fandom on the internet, just being like, oh, it's a movie about girls, and a big part of it too is like they couldn't really promote this movie because of
Right.
the actors strike. Like if you had the three of them on doing all these junkets and stuff like that, being on podcasts, I think we would have a much more robust opening. That's why which Dune was originally slated to open that same weekend, that got pushed back. So I feel like hopefully Kevin Feige is a smart guy. All the brain trust at Marvel is going to realize there's definitely extenuating circumstances when it comes to
Yeah.
this one. But
And I
yeah.
also, before we move on too
Hmm.
far, I mean, this kind of lines up with the other credit scene that we got,
Hmm.
which is the Monica of it all,
Yeah.
right? And I want to give Tiana Parrish some extra shout out here because I think that she's incredible in this movie. I think she's so fantastic. She has to really carry a lot of emotional weight as a character and a lot of expositional dialogue as a character. And it's clear that a lot of those scenes are like reshoot scenes where she maybe had 10 minutes to say something and now she has 30 seconds to say the same to convey the same information, the same emotion and everything like that. and I think she just knocks it out of the park. I think she's so good. I think in WandaVision, she was kind of the covert lead character of the show, right? She is your hero, your superhero in that show, but you don't realize that at first because you're there for Wanda and for Vision, and there's a Catherine Hahn of it all. But really, like, Wanda is your protagonist. I mean, Monica is your protagonist, and here she feels like she is coming into her own as a true superhero that could carry her own franchise as well. And I think that she just did an excellent job giving you this sense of a character who is incredibly knowledgeable and smart about the weird BS sci-fi science stuff that all Marvel characters have to be smart about, and also feel really grounded in the emotional reality of this like complicated family dynamic between her and Carol and her mom, and everything that she has lost through the blip, and everything that's gone on since she was a little kid and aliens invaded her, front porch, and also like coming into her own in terms of understanding her powers. And she has a really cool power set. Like, I can't wait for her to be a member of the Avengers and for her to continue in this universe down the road. And that made me very excited because of what they're teasing with that mid-credit scene.
Yeah, no, like you said, like that's a good way to lead in, because I was going to bring up that second, the only mid-credit scene, because yeah, it's a really cool moment. And I think she's great. I got to agree with you there. Like, I love that the way that like you said, this is very rewarding if you have, like both of us have, watched all of the things, the TV shows and the other movie that led into this. But if you haven't, she's got just a great line, like, walk through a witch force field or whatever she says. You're like,
witch hex. She pointedly calls it a witch hex, which is hilarious.
Yeah, it's so good. It's like it's like you haven't seen it, you're caught up, and it's a good character moment. It's a funny moment. You're all there. But yeah, she goes, and you like are seeing she's in a room with Dr. Fraser Crane himself. Reprising the role of Hank McCoy, Beast, and he somehow doesn't steal the scene. It's like you're like, oh my god, it's him. Like you're like that's the guy, and then but you're still like, whoa, there's her mom. Like, you're actually more invested in the personal stakes than just the big Marvel tease of it all.
Yeah, because Tana Parrish is giving like an honest reaction, like emotional performance of how that character would feel if she came face to face with her mom after losing her in that traumatic way where she dies while Monica is gone, and she never gets the opportunity to properly like say goodbye or to grieve, and she had all of that stolen from her, and then she's all of a sudden like wakes up from floating out in space and she's sitting next to her mother, and like she plays that real in a not superhero movie kind of way, just like she really goes for it. And that's, I think, a really brave thing to do, because I don't think that a lot of people are going for that. I don't think that's the expectation for a scene like that. The expectation for a scene like that is like, oh, her mom is in an alternate universe too, and look, it's Beast, and that's cool. I can't wait for the next movie. And instead, she's like, no, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and she does it. And like you said, like it makes it so that way you can't take your eyes off of her, which is good, because as an audience, we should be more in her headspace and be invested in her emotional experience of suddenly being in this alternate universe than being like, oh, I remember from that movie where Kelsey Grammer was Beast, like that. Like, you shouldn't be thinking that. You should be with the character. So I think she kind of steals the show in that way. And that's the moment you leave the entire film with, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yeah, that's a good place to leave it. One other thing I just wanted to say real quick is that I really do like the way that this film kind of fits in the wider MCU, where it's a crossover, but whenever you watch a Marvel movie, you're like, well, why don't they just call this one? And it's like, oh, cool, they called Valkyrie, like Tessa Thompson shows up. It feels like not everything needs to be like this huge, like it's like, why don't, like when a lot of times you're watching movies, it's just like, well, why don't they just do this? Why don't they call this person? And it really does feel like we are in this wider cinematic universe, and they utilized it really well here.
Yes, except you just need to pretend like Secret Invasion doesn't exist for that
right,
to work.
Yeah.
Because and trust me, when Brie Larson and Tessa Thompson are on screen together, and Tessa calls her Marv, I'm like, sure, who cares about a stupid Disney Plus show that didn't work? I'm like so into your chemistry, and I want to know everything the two of you guys did together during the 5 years that Carol was on Earth helping the Avengers, because that's how you guys clearly met, and like I want to know what that romance was like, because you guys are definitely hooking up on the side, and that's awesome. So I loved everything about that, except for the fact that it makes absolutely no sense as related to Secret Invasion.
Yeah, Nick Fury's got a squirrel wife, somewhere down on Earth. It's all good.
Not that Nick Fury. Can I just like briefly? I know we have like a long podcast to get through all this stuff, but I, I think that you just like what I'm really hoping that we learn is that the events of Secret Invasion happened on an alternate Earth because that would make perfect sense. Because then we don't need to worry about the fact that like for some reason Skrulls in that TV show felt like aliens would never be accepted on an Earth that has New Asgard, which is a refugee home
Right.
for all aliens in the universe. For some reason, we don't need to deal with Nick Fury having a wife who's just always been around and I guess like went up to the spaceship and then came back down. Don't worry about it. We don't need to deal with the fact that Rhodey is a Skrull or that Maria Hill died for no reason. We don't need to deal with the fact that the president of the United States declared war on all alien life on Earth. Let's not forget that's how that show ends.
Right.
He says that he orders them to be killed on sight. All aliens that are not that are on Earth is like an insane thing that happens at the very closing minutes of that movie, or that TV show. So just like let's pretend like none of that happened, and instead, Nick Fury was always up on that spaceship, having a good time, hanging out, talking to Carol over the intercom that works across like the vast resources of time and space. I'd love to know what that provider is. That's really impressive. And then we can just have the Skrulls be a part of New Asgard, and it works, and we can be very happy about that.
There you go. Yeah, it's part of the multiverse. It's in. Let's just say it's in the same
Exactly.
multiverse that Hellstrom is in. It's the dark and gloomy over there.
Perfect. Yeah, the one that gets blown up off screen.
Yeah. But yeah, speaking of the multiverse, Loki season 2 was all about the multiverse, and it felt like a show that's like really good context, but you don't necessarily have to watch it. But if you do, it'll be a really rewarding experience. And yeah, like we said, this is season 2 of Loki, which it looks like it's actually the definitive end of the Loki storyline, probably the definitive end of Tom Hiddleston playing this character. What did you think of Loki season 2?
I I enjoyed it. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, I'll be honest. Because I think that it started out really strong and I thought that it ended really strong. And I thought that it kind of spun its wheels a little bit too much in the middle. Now, I think that was clearly on purpose. Like, I mean, we're doing spoilers, right, for the whole
Yes, full
show.
spoilers, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that clearly where we get with Loki by the end of the show is a realization that Loki, the character, has that all of the stuff that he was running around trying to fix ultimately didn't matter, and that he was distracting himself, maybe on purpose, maybe unintentionally, kind of a complicated psychological situation there for him, because he was having a hard time accessing what he really cared about, and so it was easy to kind of get distracted with all this other stuff that ultimately didn't matter, and it didn't matter because none of it was going to work out anyway, but that doesn't matter because what really matters is the connections that he made to the people that he cares about, and the ultimate sacrifice that he's going to make, and the way in which that progresses his character. So the fact that he's kind of spinning his wheels for a few episodes makes sense, but it doesn't change the fact that watching that made it feel like we were spinning our wheels for a few episodes and getting invested in a bunch of supporting characters that ultimately ended up having no real arcs. Like, it felt like a lot of the characters that they introduced in this season, like Docs and the guy who Rafael Casal's character, whose name I'm blanking on,
Is
Hunter
it Brad?
Brad, yes.
Yeah, who's great,
So
but I was kind of like, what happened to him? Yeah.
exactly, he just disappears at a certain point. Like, the TV blazes up, and then that's it. Like, we never see him again, right? The Doc's character, similarly, it kind of, like, obviously we know exactly what happens to her. It's pretty horrible. But it feels like her storyline just kind of ends. It like the Ravonna Renslayer stuff and Miss Minutes. All of this is like a lot of incident to kind of generate all of this, like, running around with Mobius and trying to solve the problem of the day. And it ultimately doesn't go anywhere. And like I said, I think for thematic reasons that makes sense, but that still doesn't change the fact that it feels like we wasted a couple of episodes. And the fix that I would make is that if Loki is invested in these problems, or at least fooling himself into being invested in these problems by not asking too many questions and just like running headfirst into trying to fix the loom and all of this stuff, I think the show needed to do a better job to make us be on Loki's side with that stuff. And for me, I was kind of like, but what is the deal with the loom? Because if the loom didn't used to exist, and now it does exist, and it was made by He Who Remains, then why do we need to protect it? Like, what would happen if we let it just not exist anymore? Like, why do we need to fix it? And ultimately, the show was like, aha, it turns out we don't need to fix it. And it's like, yeah, that's what I've been wondering. Why did you? So I think they needed to get me personally on board more with the thing, so that way I could have the moment that Loki has, which is like, oh, all of that stuff I cared about, that wasn't what mattered, right? But instead, I had the experience of feeling like, why does this matter? Oh, it didn't. Okay, so, and that's less satisfying, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree with most of what you're saying. You know, I think that like you said, it started really strong, it ended really strong. We didn't know going into it that this was going to be the final season of Loki, and with all of that wheel spinning, I thought the episode was just going to end about 10 minutes before it did, and it was just going to be like another cliffhanger. It was like, well, we're at the same spot we were at last season. Like, why did we need to go through all of this monotony? You know, but then that ending for me is just so phenomenal that I kind of forgot about, like, not problems that I had, but just kind of like you know, I kind of forgot that it wasn't as propulsive as I had felt like in season one was. But that ending really does a lot of heavy lifting for my experience of the show, and I think that, you know, it's a very, you know, obviously a Loki show. We do lose some of the supporting characters along the way, like Renslayer and Brad, which is a bummer because they were both fun, interesting characters. But the way that we end Loki and a lot of his like close friends is really phenomenal, and I love that little conversation that Loki has when he goes back and sees, you know, the new perspective when he's like unstuck in time or whatever. He talks to Mobius before they've ever really met, and he talks about his glorious purpose, which is also the name of the episode. That was one thing that Loki talked about in like the first couple Thor movies. He talked about it in Avengers. Like, he's a god, he's destined to reign, you know, and Mobius kind of recontextualizes it. He's kind of like, it's not like this glorious purpose. It's not to just like reign and rule. It's like a responsibility. And he uses the word burden, and that kind of clicks something in Loki. And then he realizes that his glorious purpose is not to just rule over everybody and to just be this, you know, man on the hill. It's to take on the burden for everyone, for all these multiverses. And, you know, the whole thing about like, I think it's really interesting because it's obviously setting up I think the loom thing is like, oh yeah, like we've got to protect the loom. So like, it's a lot of spinning wheels and a lot of things coming at you. And I probably have to rewatch it, but it's just like, oh, we got to do this so that there won't be this big intergalactic war for some reason with all the different Kangs. And now that's obviously going to happen with Secret Wars and everything. But they decided, like, yeah, free will, blow it up. We're rather than just having one sacred timeline, we're gonna like let the multiverse go. And Loki going and walking and grabbing all the threads and sitting on that throne and taking on this burden was so great. And especially with that, as now we found out, improvised line of his where he's like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it for us. It's just a callback to his end of the first Thor movie when he's, you know, he's hanging off that fucking bridge, you know, and he's still then just like, I was doing this, I was being the leader, but that's more of a disillusion thing. That's more of him just being like, no, I'm doing this for us, I'm being the great leader for us. But he's wrong. Like, Odin's like, no, Loki, this time he's taking that same sentiment but actually realizing what it really truly means, and taking on this glorious purpose.
Right. Well, and it's that whole thing that you know, Thor says to Loki in the Avengers, where he says, like, or it might have been in Thor, I forget, but where he says, like, oh, you think that you are they're better, meaning better than humans.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, obviously. And he's like, well, then a crown would suit, or a throne would suit you ill, right? Because he's like, if you don't realize that you are one of these people, if you think that you're better than everybody, then of course you can't rule them in a way that would be fair and just. And by the end of this series, he gets there. And I think that it's a really remarkable like story arc that we get. And I think it's, you know, we're talking so much about like what's wrong with Marvel these days, right? What is the like, it needs to be more interconnected, it needs to be less interconnected, it needs whatever. But the thing that only something like Marvel can do is tell a story like this over the course of so many installments, where a character is kind of just slowly progressing and backfalling and moving forward and backwards in time, both literally and figuratively, right? When it comes to Loki, right? But we end up in this beautiful place for his character that feels so much more satisfying even than the end that he meets in Infinity War when he gets that moment where he kind of confronts Thanos and declares his allegiance finally to Thor and Odin and in a way that really means something. And it's like that's a nice moment of closure between him and his family. But this is a great moment of closure between him and himself, right? And all of the things that have plagued him and all of like the doubts in his heart that has caused him to go towards doing some pretty heinous stuff every once in a while. But it's really beautiful that he gets to this place of saying like, no, ultimately the thing that will make me the most happy, right? Because that's kind of this question that kind of occupies his mind through a lot of the last two episodes is what is it that I really want? And it's like, I want my friends to be okay, is where he ends up. And he's willing to sacrifice himself in order to do that. And that makes him a hero, a true hero. And I think that is even more so than what he does in Infinity War, where he does sacrifice himself, but he thinks he can get the one over on Thanos still. He knows that it's a long shot, but he's Loki and he thinks he could pull it off. There's still that little bit of arrogance, even well intended. And here, like, he is truly sacrificing himself for his friends. And I think that that's wonderful, even if the show never made me believe that he was actually friends with Casey and Hunter B-15. He's like, my beloved friends who I have not spoken to at all. So it's like, that's an issue. But I think that ultimately Tom sells it as so much. And he's just incredible in this final episode. Just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, he is so freaking good, I think. And just to, real fast, I just want to like touch on I think that this supporting cast is all incredible. I think it's like, is he really friends with him? But like the charisma and the chemistry that these actors have, like I love just like Obi, like the way Owen Wilson and Ki Hu Kwan interact is so good. Also, just want to shout out Eugene. It's Corrado.
Cordero.
Thank you.
Cordero.
Yeah, Cordero. Thank you. As Casey, which is I think he's really great. He's I've seen him on like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and a couple other things, and I love that moment.
He's really funny in The Good Place, also.
That's what I was thinking of, The Good Place. But he's I love that revelation. It felt a lot like how you realize that Loki's DB Cooper in the first season, that he was one of the guys who escaped Alcatraz. Like I remember watching that episode of Mythbusters back in the day, like the head, like, and in real life, the guy's name was Frank. He was the leader he was like this genius level inmate at Alcatraz who staged this huge escape. And it's like, oh, that's who he was the whole time. I thought that was such a cool moment. Like nice, just little fun Easter egg. And this was just filled with fun little Easter eggs that never felt like they were distracting from anything. They were just part of, like we were saying, just with the Marvels, this large overarching story, and how everything is all just kind of connected. It was really cool. I honestly had a blast with this show. I probably need to go back and rewatch it now that both seasons are out. And it's only 12 episodes, so I could just binge it, But yeah, any other thoughts on Loki?
Yeah, so I have to put my podcast host hat on for a second and ask you the question that I think everyone wants to know, which is, which was the better deployed fast food restaurant? Was it Baskin Robbins in the Ant-Man franchise, or was it McDonald's here in season 2 of Loki?
Oh, that's a very good question, right? Like McDonald's was pretty good here, especially since like it was like that 80s nostalgic nostalgia, but I don't think you can beat Baskin Robbins Always Finds Out. Like that's so good. Like that's so it's like it just felt like this felt like it could have been McDonald's could have been like anything, it didn't really matter. That's where she was working. It's nice to see her with the bangs and like the 80s aesthetic working in McDonald's, but I don't know, it's something just so like perfect about Baskin Robbins in those movies. That first one especially, that is just, I don't know. That's my pick. How about you?
I fully agree, because here's the thing. I think that the jokes related to Baskin Robbins in the Ant-Man movies, all three of them. They all hit. They all work. They're all very funny. And I never want to go to Baskin Robbins more afterwards. And for me, that's a successful product placement because I don't want it to feel like advertising, right? I want it to be like we have a funny idea, and so we'll get the brand to that I would prefer. The McDonald's like Owen Wilson being like, man, these apple pies are just so amazing. You got to try one. I'm like, okay, like calm down.
It did kind of make me be like, I do want to go back to the 80s and try some like 80s McDonald's.
Sure,
that specifically like that you kids like now they're all just like industrial buildings, but like, seeing those like old school arches and stuff like that, like I want to go hang out with like the like I don't know if you ever saw The Founder, but like that era of McDonald's or something,
Yeah. Yeah, just one more excuse for Michael Keaton to pop up.
Right, exactly. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and talking about both these. Like I said, I'm so glad we finally got things to line up because it was like, oh, it's delayed again. Oh, where we're gonna? Oh, let's talk about this show. Oh, no, that one's delayed too. Now the strike is happening. We got to talk about this one. Let's just talk about. And then I had like another guest fall through who was just supposed to do one of them. So because of the strike, and so I'm really glad it all worked out. Obviously, you're very, very knowledgeable about MCU and just about the entertainment industry in general. What do you want to let people know? Where can people find you in your podcast?
Yeah, so you can go. The best place to find all the stuff that I do is by going to thepopbreak.com, clicking on the podcast tab. Like we said at the beginning, I'm the podcasting director over there, which means I'm the host of a few podcasts. I'm also the executive producer on a lot of podcasts over there. We have podcasts for wrestling, we have podcasts for television, reality shows, nerd stuff, movies, music, you name it, we got it. I am the lead host on a monthly show on Pop Break TV podcast feed. That is called TV Break, where we talk about kind of the ins and outs of the world of TV every month. If you're going to listen to it this month, we're going to be doing our year in review episode, where we talk about kind of the biggest news stories, the best TV shows, the biggest streaming service of the year, all that stuff. So that's a nice kind of way to preview or at least sample what we got going on over there. More relevant to your interests might be Bill versus the MCU, which I've alluded to. Last year in 2022, like I said, we watched the first 4 phases of the MCU from start to finish. In this year, in our second and third seasons, we decided to, dip into the wider Marvel multiverse. And so, Derek, you were nice enough to come on during our Defenders mini-series, which took up the first half of the year. We did Daredevil season 1 and 2. We did Jessica Jones season 1, Luke Cage season 1. We skipped over Iron Fist because I have Mercy for my co-host, and we watched the event. We watched the Defenders, which is the episode that you were nice enough to come on. For the rest of the year, we did the first 4 seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which was so much fun. And not to trash Secret Invasion anymore, but I will say that when my co-host Bill was watching Secret Invasion, I told him that, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. actually did a lot of the stuff that Secret Invasion is trying to do much better. And he kind of was like, yeah, okay. He kind of like rolled his eyes a little bit at me. And then I made him watch those episodes and for the show. And I mean, you're going to have to tune in to see, but I think by the tone of my voice, you can hear that I kind of won him over to the dark side, and he's now a Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fan as a result. So definitely check out those episodes. And we got a lot of fun stuff planned for the future. Next month, we're going to be doing an episode checking in on Marvel Phase 5 by doing Secret Invasion, Loki, and the Marvels. So if you liked listening to me talk about that here, you can hear me talk about it even more in my episode. And then in January, we do our Feiges, which is our annual awards episode, where we kind of like recap all of the stuff that we covered in the year. And then I'm going to give you an exclusive scoop because we announced at the end of our S.H.I.E.L.D. coverage that we were planning on doing another season of S.H.I.E.L.D. for the first half of next year, but we decided, based on some recent events, including that end credit scene, that we're actually going to be covering the X-Men franchises for the first half of next year, leading up to Deadpool 3 in July. So it's going to be fun. We're going to be doing every X-Men movie over 6 months. So that's going to be a blast. So you can check us out there. And also, if you like Batman, I am a sometimes co-host on our Batman by the Numbers podcast, which, along with the Bill vs. MCU, you can follow on Pop Break Today podcast feed. And that is hosted by Dan Cohen. We review Batman live-action movies, animated movies. We rank a lot of Batman stuff. Like, we did a kind of completely insane episode where we ranked every Batman trailer that ever existed for a live-action movie. So if that sounds like your idea of fun, you could check that out as well over there.
Nice, a lot of good stuff. Yeah, I've been listening to you guys just talk about Shield. A lot of good stuff over there. Yeah, those first 4 seasons of Shield are something else. So definitely check all that stuff out, guys. And then for me, I just want to mention before we go here a couple of the other podcasts that I do as well. The main one that I do is called Underrated, where, as the name would imply, we talk about underrated and underappreciated films. I also co-host a podcast with my friend Damien that I alluded to earlier, called I was about to say the wrong name, but he just changed the name a couple months ago. It's called the Midnight Film Society, where it's more of a just kind of general film talk, what's been coming out recently, that kind of thing. And then so a lot of change. I've been doing a lot of changes, a lot of this stuff recently, including that there's going to be starting on the first of the year, a lot of changes, including the Patreon, which there is, of course, the Patreon exclusive podcast that I do over on if you just go to underratedmoviepodcast.com or patreon.com/underratedmoviepodcast, find all that stuff. Listen to the bonus podcast Underdogs, where I cover a sports film once a month. And then, so this is the first time I'm actually saying this on the show. So I'm going to finish Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones out for this year. Really wanted to have you on during that. So glad we got to talk about these 2 big ones here. I'm going to talk about What If, and then following that, Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones is going to be on Patreon. So it's going to be on that same Patreon, just the $1 level. So if anybody wants to sign up, you can keep listening to this show, just $1 a month. But the old episodes aren't going anywhere. This episode's going to be able to be listened to in perpetuity. If you want, I'm not taking anything away, but
thank goodness.
Yeah. No, don't worry, man. I got you. I was about to throw you behind a paywall. I saw your face there for a second. So. But yeah, go 2024. There's going to be a couple changes, so make sure to check that out. And check out all of. I was about to say Bill's stuff, but you're not Bill, of course. Check out all of Alex's stuff. And let us know what other Marvel stuff you guys enjoyed. What you thought of Loki and the Marvels. But once again, man, thank you so much for coming on. I had an absolute blast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always love to talk about this stuff, so it's been a pleasure.